Welcome to SunSpots, where we explore the many ways that the Holy Spirit is working in the people, places, ministries, and missions on the surface of the sun. That is, the Synod of the Sun. I'm Valerie Young, your Synod leader. My prayer is that you find inspiration, community, and connection in the Sun. Today, I get to talk with Reverend Charlie Smith, the Interim Presbytery Pastor for Indian Nations Presbytery. As a second career pastor, Charlie has served congregations all over the country. We talk about the difference between congregational and mid-council ministry, our Enneagram numbers, and some of the most exciting things coming out of Central Oklahoma. This conversation was so much fun. Oh, we also talked about the importance of fun. You're going to want to listen. Absolutely. Well, what I'm hoping for today is that we could just have a conversation.
Sure.
And Thomas and I are working on doing this podcast a little bit differently than what we've been doing before. So there will be some editing, audio editing, but the video, there will be some editing of the video, but it won't match. It will be like get the full story on YouTube as opposed to just the audio part on podcasting. So
I'm thoroughly jazzing with the SunSpots. I'm enjoying those.
Oh, cool. Good. That's good. Good. Hey, it's good somebody's listening.
They're great to listen to while I'm running.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'll try and give it a better tempo for you.
What I need is to record the 30-second dance party for about an hour, and
right.
People would really wonder down May Avenue in Oklahoma City while I was running.
Oh, so I used to be an avid speed walker, and I have, in order to do that, it has to be the right tempo of music.
Yeah.
And inevitably, I'm gonna
stand up.
Inevitably, I wouldn't just be walking. I would be dancing.
I like it.
In suburban Arlington, Texas. Down Main Street called.
Had to draw some honks from trucks.
Yeah, or no, just laughs. More like pointing and laughing.
Yeah, that too.
So yeah. But I'm so glad to be doing this. The other thing that we've talked about a lot is our need to have back and forth conversation, right? And not just one-sided space. So that's really what I'm hoping for.
Some dialogue.
Yeah, that would be a good thing. What I want to start off with though is what is the difference between a presbytery pastor and an executive presbyter?
I'm learning every day. Nobody defined it when I walked in, and nobody is still able to fully define it. I think it more accurately describes, what is needed specifically in this context, but also it is an acknowledgement that we're in the church business, and instead of simply doing business, the word church is first, and we ought to be doing pastoral care, and we ought to be doing the work of the church. And so I see my job as not only the easy way I usually describe it to folks is mine is an ecclesiastical help desk where people if they need any help, they give us a call. But more importantly, there are certainly administrative duties because ultimately, sadly, we are a business and have to acknowledge it. But the thing that really captured even my imagination when I read the paperwork before I even applied for the position is the idea that I'm a local version of Ananias from Acts. The story of Paul being blinded, and during that period before he actually caught fire and caught a vision and became Paul, while he was still Saul, he was guided and directed and led around by a person named Ananias. And in so many different ways that seems to fit all the different duties and tabs I put on my hat to explain the idea of not only recognizing my own blindness and being educated, but also helping others to see where they may be blind and not realizing it. So I love the journey that I'm on, but more importantly, the journey that all of us are on when I visit different churches, when I talk to different sessions, when I do everything that I do. And the list just keeps growing. One of the great loves I have of the job is that even during a slow afternoon, or, the word that I use more often than not in previous calls was that I was bored. If I ever find myself feeling bored, then
Uh-huh.
I just take out my white pad from the workbook that you gave me and start writing out ideas. If I could do this, what would it be? And what can we try differently? And 50% of them won't work or don't come to fruition, but that's the joy of being able to think outside the box and always be looking beyond the horizon, guiding myself as well as others into whatever future God's giving us.
Right. Right. I love that. The way that you describe it about Ananias and have you found yourself having to explain to people, or maybe even correct people, that you're not an EP, you're a Presbytery pastor, and that there is a difference? I know for myself, my title is Synod Leader.
Mhm.
uh, More often than not, people introduce me or want to introduce me as a Synod executive, and I correct them at every opportunity anyway. I try and correct them because there is a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly the administrative duties need to be done, but I benefit from the inevitable pendulum swing of my predecessor and me, and in being able to say I'm not who the person who was before, and so
Mhm.
I can carve my own path, and I'm a completely different person, and it it allows people to let down their guard and immediately not, it's like the IRS, the government. I'm here to help. The minute the presbytery walks into a meeting or appears at a church, there's an
Oh yeah.
assumption that there's a problem or something's gone wrong. And I can go
Mhm.
in and preach and meet with sessions and simply just talk in blue sky without any preconditions and preconceptions, which is a wonderfully liberating thing. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some uncomfortable conversations and times that I'm going to have to wear the black hat of administration, but so far that hasn't happened. And I'd like to think the gentle and the amiable meetings will pave the way to make the harder ones in the future easier.
Mhm. I there's You describe it as administration, but the old title is executive. And that, for me, they're two different things, right? If it was only about administration, then it would have been Synod administrator, presbytery
Mhm.
administrator. But no, it was executive, that old corporate model. And that word to me means power and authority and all of that, which should not in the Presbyterian church rest in one person.
Absolutely. My previous call was a corporate church which demanded someone with an MBA. And during one of the many staff upheavals, they called in somebody who used intelligent EQ and
Mhm.
leadership,
Emotional intelligence.
emotional intelligence, all those different surveys. And I scored off the chart on empathy and on collaboration and on the sort of warm and fuzzy aspects of an executive. And the personnel committee, unfortunately filled with bankers, was terribly bothered by that. And I kept saying, I know what my strengths are, and I know that the other areas are areas of growth. But why do I need to concentrate on the areas of growth when that would ultimately not lead to great satisfaction by any party? So
Mhm.
I'm so much. I certainly can do the other things. It's sort of like, trying to write right-handed if you're left-handed. But if God gave us gifts to use, we might as well celebrate the gifts that we use and be placed in a position where those are celebrated and used to their best advantage, than trying as an administrator or an executive or whatever the title is. There are plenty of people with those skills, but I'm the first one to acknowledge that they are not one of my strongest skills, and I can work them up to a decent level, but they're never going to be my strengths.
Mhm. Well, and I think you and I have talked about this um, in the past. A lot of that is who you are as an Enneagram 7. right?
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
and uh, we've talked about that a lot. You're a 7, I'm a 3. I like to think I'm a pretty creative 3, but
You are.
the way that you describe yourself is very much an Enneagram 7, thinking outside of the box, as old as that term is, but thinking creatively, not only yourself, but helping other people, helping others and systems to
Yep.
think creatively, which as I have, um, as I have watched you in this role, you've been able to do to help the system think differently and be creative in a space where there
Mhm.
wasn't room for that before.
And the word fun is often not associated with church and
Mm.
somehow makes some people uncomfortable. In one of my previous calls, one of the first meetings of session, I told them my goal each Sunday is for people to walk in and empowered by the Holy Spirit to embrace the mystery, to wonder what in the world is going to happen today. And
Hmm.
I've done some wild and crazy and really stupid things in worship, but and some have worked and some haven't. But I believe that creativity is one of the great gifts that God has given us through the Spirit. And it was interesting because when I told the session that my goal, there was silence around the room, and then finally somebody mustered up the courage to speak and said, "And you speak like that's a good thing." And I said, this is going to be a continuing conversation. And one of the valuable things I've learned is not only, the ability to walk away from failure, but also to realize that my passion and what I believe is is fun or is positive isn't shared by everybody. Um,
Mm.
that a Charlie generated great idea may not be embraced by others. And I've learned how to be able to say no and say, it's not my taste, but that's fine. I, I, I guess one of my great regrets through ministry has been that people, for whatever reason, didn't say, we don't know that that's actually going to be a great idea. It might have forestalled some disastrous Sundays. The old road dabbling. If you
Hmm.
think it's a bad idea, you ought to say no instead of just using groupthink and all saying yes.
Yeah, and I have struggled with how you empower groups to speak up,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, because I've said over the years, even to the Synod coordinating team, it troubles me that in the last, I don't know, 5 or maybe even 10 years as a synod and an assembly, there are very few questions asked,
Hmm.
very few um, uh, votes where anyone votes against something. And I find that concerning.
Hmm.
Hopefully
Hmm.
necessarily, but concerning. So you mentioned failure. I'm really interested to hear some of the ways that you have experienced. Failure is a harsh word. People don't like to talk about it. They don't want to, but for lack of another word, what are some ways that you have experienced your own failures or failures that you maybe initially thought were failures, but in hindsight now you can see that the spirit was at work and that the spirit did something you weren't anticipating.
Hmm. Um, I've learned to embrace failure as a concept, but the truth is, my Enneagram 7 and my extroversion doesn't disguise the fact I have exceedingly thin skin. Um,
Mm.
and the hardest failures for me, as I said before, are the ones where somebody could have warned me before. If they had a problem with it, if they'd been honest, then I would have acknowledged it and marched in a different direction. I stole it. I stole an idea whole cloth from a previous church of trying to reach out to people who had been divorced from the church, who'd walked away and not come back. And the idea was to invite those people whom you hadn't seen in a long time to come to a Bible study, to a Sunday worship, to a Wednesday night dinner, anything. And we put up a huge bulletin board with invitation envelopes, and on the envelopes it said who was the inviter, who you invited, and what to. And that church did, I think, 250 in a month, and I thought we could easily do 100, the size of our church.
Mm-hmm.
And about midway through the month, we stuck at 39, and it never moved. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me, and I kept talking it up and talking about it and endlessly promoting it. And finally, the next to last Sunday of the month, 3 of the matriarchs of the church were standing in front of the bulletin board taking notes of the names that were on the envelopes. And I wandered over and I said, I'm just curious why you're writing these all down. And one of them said, well, we're going to call all the people who've been named because they've been shamed by being put up on that bulletin board. And I said, I can't, I'm flummoxed at the idea that shame has been associated with this. And I truly wish somebody had said something. And to their credit, they honestly answered. And they said, everybody's been talking about what a horrible idea this was since you said it. And that's the sort of failure that, I appreciate the fact that it was a bad idea, but I would never have known that it was a bad idea unless somebody had said something. And that taught me a very valuable lesson, as I said before, that all of Charlie's ideas aren't bought into by other people. And that's okay. I'm fine with that. But that wounded me about as much as anything I've had in 20 years of ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope you've been enjoying this episode of SunSpots, a region of the Presbyterian Church USA. We are Presbyterians in Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas, with dynamic and hopeful ministry happening in the name of Jesus Christ. If you have a good news story or an exceptional ministry to be highlighted, send that good news to sunspot@synodsun.org. Now, back to the show. So, your story. I know you spent a number of years as a journalist, right? And then you've served churches in Ohio and Kansas and Oklahoma, but now you're home.
Yep.
You call Oklahoma City your home, right?
Right. I am. I'm a Virginia native, but I spent more time in Oklahoma City.
Oh, okay. Okay. So how did you, in the thumbnail, what's the story? How'd you go from journalism to a call to ministry?
Kicking and screaming. And even worse for my wife, Diana. She married a journalist, not a minister. It all stems to Enneagram 7. I knew from 4th grade I wanted to be in newspapers. And I had blinders on of going into newspapers. And I wish it, with 2020 hindsight and vision now at the conclusion of a career, that somebody had said, I understand what you want to do. Let's see how your own skills match up with your desire to go into journalism. Because the truth is, journalism as a reality never matched up with the dream that I had of what journalism would be. It was long stretches of extreme boredom, not much fun, as I use that word frequently. And we moved every 3 years because I would have a challenge at a new job. It would level off and then the boredom would begin. And Diana, to her great credit, put up with it, with moving every 3 years, but finally said, there's something else here. There must be a career. And I did extensive work. Johnson O'Connor does fabulous work of career development, with the idea that you're a round peg in a square hole. And, some obvious questions. I'm a people person, obviously. And they said, what is your day like? And I said, I stare at a computer screen for 8 hours and deal with people very little. And they said, can you see how that might lead to frustration? And I'm a great morning person. I'm up way before dawn. And my hours in journalism were 4 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the morning. And there were And there were all sorts of signs through the journalistic career of pure frustration that if I'd had more wherewithal, I really ended up trapped believing I'm a journalist. I've always been a journalist. People know me as a journalist. I can do no other. And to have limited myself that way only led to running into brick walls. I almost got fired twice, and I wish by the grace of God it had actually happened, because then I could have figured things out. So I ended up getting a mid-career fellowship by the Night Reader newspaper chain for copy editors to go to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at the University of North Carolina, to take a semester of study and take a break from journalism with the belief that you'd get your batteries recharged. And Diane and I both agreed this was a chance to go to the off-ramp instead of recharging batteries. And I started attending church at University Pres in Chapel Hill, where Bob Dunham is, one of the giants of the denomination, and sang in the choir, did Bible study, got very involved in the church very quickly. And one Sunday, as I was leaving the sanctuary after services, Bob stopped and said, "You're Charlie Smith, aren't you?" And I thought, this is like the president knowing your name. How in the world does he know who I am? And he said, "Come into my office on Monday. I'd like to talk to you." And it was sort of like being called to the principal's office. I was dreading it. And within 5 minutes of talking to Bob Dunham, he said, "It's clear to me you're being called into ministry." And no one had ever enunciated that at all. I truthfully had, as I told the career development person, had thought in high school, when I was an acolyte in the Episcopal Church, I'd thought about ministry. And I put it away saying, that's a silly, frivolous idea. You're going to journalism. So there was the idea in the back of my mind. And I went for a weekend. University Pres had a scholarship fund to send people to Union Seminary in Richmond for the weekend of inquiry. And I went up, took the train up from Chapel Hill. And within about 3 hours of being there, I thought, this is it. The spark just lit. It was still a difficult transition from journalism into ministry. I felt like an undercover reporter on the seminary grounds around all these churchy people who'd done all this church work. But I found my stride. I always knew I could do communications because of my journalism work. But the real joy I found in ministry, the fun, is pastoral care, is telling stories, is funerals and writing homilies and making home visits and all the person-to-person touch that I'd so craved because I missed it so much in journalism, especially when I moved from reporting to copy editing. So as I tell everybody when I preach at churches, I love to tell the story really encapsulates both ends of my career. I love telling people stories in journalism, and I love telling the story, the proclamation of the gospel in ministry.
So why would you want to be a presbytery leader?
That's as I've told everybody since I got here, I wish I'd known and realized my strengths and my skills would be so well suited here earlier in my career, because ultimately the routine of a parish ministry and the frustrations and the lack of fun, the word again, in each of the parishes began to model after 3 calls, just like newspapers. I would love it for 3 years and then suddenly plateau and boredom would set in because I was doing the same thing over and over again. And, also, I guess selfishly, I always think of that wonderful Peanuts strip of Lucy saying, "I love humanity. It's people I can't stand." The politics of the local parish and I sometimes were a bad mix. And I think the visioning and the expansive playfulness and trying different things fits a lot better in the seat I'm seated in now than sometimes it did in the parish.
Well, I would say too that even though you might wish that all of this had been figured out earlier, the church wasn't ready for you. Right? I don't think the presbytery was ready for you. I don't, mid-councils, well, we've discussed that about in terms of titles. I think those titles are very indicative of where where the church was in a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And they were the corporate, what we're experiencing now in my, from my perspective, what we're experiencing now as mid-councils is sort of that backlash to the corporate model, right?
Absolutely.
The backlash from the authoritarian hierarchical model. They didn't want to have fun.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Not the ways that we define it anyway.
Yeah. And I have to give you and Judy Fletcher and Jim Bellotti and Landon Whitsitt up in Synod of Mid-American, James Gale, so many contemporaries and colleagues, because my involvement always was very strong with Synod and Presbytery stuff. And everywhere I went, there were hints. I mean, if I'd sat down and pressed them, I suspect everybody thought, this could be in your wheelbox, or in your wheelhouse, that my increasing involvement, and Melanie Hancock up in northern Kansas really enunciated it, finally saying, you really are called to that sort of more expansive and less restrictive and limiting exercising of your vision and your chops.
And the cool part about our jobs is that if it gets boring, we can come up with something else.
Absolutely.
I think there's always room for more ideas. Whether or not people can always take that or respond is another thing, right? But then again, another benefit to that creative type of ministry is the rotational nature of the church, of the system, right? If there were any benefits in that, I mean, in my mind, there are certainly some detriments in the rotational nature, but one of the big benefits of that is that it's, at least that part, gives you an opportunity to be new again,
Absolutely,
new again, and come up with new and exciting and creative types of endeavors.
And it really feels in so many ways like returning back to the newsroom, to the pure exhilaration and adrenaline rush of a day in which, like when the Murrah building exploded in Oklahoma City, when whatever list I come up with in my mind thinking, well, I need to accomplish 1, 2, and 3 today as I'm driving in, that's thrown out the window, and you're thinking on your feet and you're reacting and you're doing stuff because it needs to get done, and reprioritizing and all of that. I get so jazzed on days like that. That's the perfect kind of day for me.
That's interesting. Me too. I was listening to another podcast earlier today someone was interviewing another Enneagram 3 leader, and they were talking very much about that feeling of you're on, the feeling that you're on fire, right? Yep. That all of that energy, and that when you're working on something really cool and creative, and you can make it happen. It's that, and that's definitely what I experienced that whole time I'm listening to this other person. I'm just going, yep.
One of the other outlets I actually had thought of was PDA, sort of disaster response, because when I was in northern Kansas, a friend in Nebraska, when they had flooding a couple of summers ago, called and said, we really need water bottles. And so that day I determined we're going to call as many people as we can. We're going to get as many water bottles, and we're driving up to Nebraska. And the associate at the church, God bless him, is one of those plotting planners who likes to have meetings about upcoming meetings and all the rest. And it couldn't have been more oil and vinegar that day, because I said, we're getting bottles, we're driving. And he said, well, I'm really uncomfortable with this. We need to have a committee meeting. And I said, no, we're getting bottles, we're driving. And he said, well, let me get out my whiteboard and let's sketch out some ideas. And I said, no, we're getting bottles, we're driving. And it just never translated for the poor guy.
I feel like I'm having some of those experiences right now.
Yeah,
I feel like there are some people in my life saying, no, we're going to do this, and we're going to drag this out even longer, and we need to have these conversations, and we need to, and I'm like, no, we've got this is all put together. Let's go to the next step.
We do think.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So they can be done in a lot of ways. They can be done as you go, right?
Sure.
Or something. But can we light a fire under that just a little bit, please? Just
And
a
and
little bit.
and staff meetings became famous up in Kansas that Charlie would spend most of the hour going, "Hey, what if we did this? What if we tried this? What if we tried this?" And the other members around the table were like, "Well, how would that look practically?" And I was like, "You worry about the details. Let's just try it."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although I will admit, I mean, I am a whiteboard person, but I'm
Hmm.
not a slow whiteboard person, right?
Hmm.
So when I'm brainstorming, I will. In fact, we had a synod, the last physical synod space that we had. I painted a big square of dry erase paint
Hmm.
so I could write on the wall.
Oh, I like it.
And so I could sketch things out as I was brainstorming, or I was sitting with a group. We could write things out, and I mean, huge space. It was the whole size of a, I don't know, 8 by 12 wall, something.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and that was really, really helpful. Now I just go through a whole bunch of those, you know, post-it papers,
Post-it notes. Yep.
big, yeah, white
Yep.
sheet. Um, yeah, so I love those opportunities to be creative and think through all of that.
And
So
I loved can't remember who, maybe James Gale, whoever came up with it, to actually work backwards and think if we come up with idea A, then let's think of the worst disaster that could happen and what could go wrong, and then work backwards from that in order to perfect it. And I love that idea.
yeah, although I've never I've always worked backwards from the intended outcome.
Hmm. Hmm.
Very rarely do I think about what's the worst thing that could happen. I just work from the intended outcome and work back from there as a process to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So far, for the most part, I think it's worked. I almost hate to add in the worst case scenario piece, but I think my husband would tell you I do that on a regular basis anyway. So
And my first reaction, as befits an Enneagram 7 when that was proposed, was I don't like that idea at all, because it will discourage people from coming up with the idea to begin with,
mm,
because they'll figure it's being batted down. And it took a lot of talking of me off the ledge to understand that actually that is a good thing
mhm.
sometimes. I mean,
Yeah,
yes, my inclination still is to jump and mid flight to say maybe this wasn't the best idea, but you learn from those too.
yeah. Well, it could have helped to avoid the wall of the Hall of
Invi-
Fame in the
Invitations. Yeah.
in the church.
The other disaster I always tell is early in my ministry, I preached on the aroma of God, or aroma of Christ. I think it's in Hebrews. And I had a brilliant idea, so I filled every windowsill and in a ring around surrounding the sanctuary, I put incense sticks. And I lit them all and started to preach, and there was this haze over the sanctuary. And within about my first paragraph came the first sneezes, and then within the end of my first page, there was coughing and hacking, and everybody started to flee out the back door into the fellowship hall. And I thought, this was really a bad idea. So I don't think I'll try incense anymore.
Or at least maybe, limited.
I wanted a good odor in there, and
For
oh
sure.
man, did I overdo it. Yeah, that was one of Charlie's top 10 fails.
Wow. Wow. So, Charlie, do you have any pet peeves?
Pet Pete. Well, as an old copy editor, bad grammar is one of the worst peeves. I guess.
You must find yourself editing or correcting my emails a lot.
Oh no, not your emails. I was going to say, when I go hear other preachers, they always roll their eyes because they're like, "Oh, great, he's editing my sermon as I'm going." Um, as befits somebody who likes to have fun and likes to enjoy life, I guess. Um, it always, I always have to stop and count to 10 when my enthusiasm isn't met with equal enthusiasm. Um, uh, Early in our marriage, I'm a great baseball fan, and I would come bounding in and tell Diana, "Hey, let's go to the ball game today." And Diana is a thinker and a planner, and her answer always was, "It's a good idea. Let me think about that." And immediately my reaction was, she hates it. She doesn't like it. And I'd go into the other room and sulk, figuring that she'd said no. And it took a couple of years to realize when people say, "Okay, let me think about that," that doesn't mean no. Um, I, so as a pet peeve, I sort of act like an 8-year-old when I don't get equal enthusiasm to my enthusiasm. And I need to remind myself that I'm not an 8-year-old again.
So you count to 10.
Hmm.
Okay.
And I, I have to walk myself back to remind myself that I'm not 8. I have a strong shadow
Mhm.
that sometimes displays itself in sort of surprising ways. I often, though I am a great extrovert in a room of unknown people, I often sort of revert to a provocateur's role to see how I can stir things up. Um, and it's probably just to draw attention to myself, but I often have to stop and pinch my knee and say, "You don't have to play that role. Just see how things develop."
That's really interesting. I have because I have a similar tendency. Okay, as an Enneagram 3 with a strong 4 wing,
Hmm. Hmm.
I have a strong tendency in a room of people that I don't know as well to do one of two things: either withdraw into a corner, pretend like no one can see me because it's overwhelming,
Hmm.
or go in for shock and awe, baby.
Yep,
Right?
exactly. I know exactly what you mean.
One of my favorite, so I've been in meetings before. I think they did this at a Board of Pensions regional gathering when they were doing those, where we did small groups and they asked people to introduce themselves and tell what was the question? It was to tell us the strangest job we've ever had or something
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
This is the most fun answer I had for that question ever. Is I was a teenage escort.
That needs some explanation.
I was an escort, and that gets a lot of what, there's so much more I could say, but when I get to share about that, I get to tell about the time as I don't, maybe not teenage, 19, 20-year-old, I had a job of escorting Tony the Tiger in the local children's hospital.
Oh, how cool.
The guy that wore the Tony the Tiger outfit,
Hmm.
because he couldn't see. He couldn't see the steps, to find the steps, to find the railings, to find
Hmm.
any of that stuff.
Hmm.
But I got to escort the guy. That was, yeah. So yeah, I
That's
go in for
cool.
shock. I either go in for shock and awe, or I would draw into a corner and hope that no one can see me. And there's a lot
Hmm.
of, like you said, shadows. The lot of nobody needs to know me kind of.
And I think as we age, we come to learn to know ourselves better and acknowledge, as much as I like to shock people and think outside the box and all the rest, I'm not at my best in large groups. The folks of Credo apparently use my name as a verb to discourage people. I was a disaster at Credo. When they said the first day we had to sign a covenant to unplug our TVs because we were there for a Sabbath and not to watch TV, and it was World Series week. So I let it be known, I'm sorry, the TV's staying on and I'm watching the World Series. And that was only the first of many head-butting experiences I had with the leaders of Credo. For whatever reason, when I get into conferences in large groups, I establish what it is that I will do and I won't do, and I won't stray from that. And
Mhm.
I don't play well with others in large groups and conferences, and I've never quite understood why.
Yeah. I I've had some similar experiences where I've done things like that. So yeah, I don't think that's isn't that interesting?
Well, as I think I mentioned to you in a follow-up conversation, I've always wondered if it doesn't stem from my thin skin and sensitivity. I always revert when I talk about the 8-year-old. It's the kid on the ball field who was the last to be picked for the pickup baseball games. Always,
Mhm.
I have a real insecurity avenue deep in my soul, and I have to work to overcome that. And again, to remind myself that I am no longer that 8-year-old.
I That's interesting. So I don't for for me, I constantly find myself, or I hope to find myself, work to remind myself that everyone experiences a similar imposter syndrome that
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
I know maybe one person in my life who doesn't seem to experience that at all, but has such security about themselves, and so yeah, that's I function that much better when I can remember that other people are people too.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the truly great gifts of this call, not only what I'm doing, is the location. Having grown up in Oklahoma City and having planned to come back here at retirement anyway, the boundaries that have been quickly established are fabulous here. In that I have an entirely separate life, and in terms of job security, I could walk away tomorrow. And not that there's any danger, I hope, or that people are displeased, but I have a cadre of friends who've known me since sixth grade, and I don't have to put up masks at all. They know me better than I know myself.
Mm.
They're the ones that, in the classic style, when we came back to announce that I was going into ministry and leaving journalism, and I was terrified of telling everybody because they'd always known me as a journalist. And to a person, all of them said, "We see this. This is right. We've just been waiting for you to say this. You have all the right
Yeah.
skills." And none of them, not only were none of them surprised, they all affirmed it so strongly. So I can pick up the phone and call anybody and go have a pizza and enjoy an evening, and the idea and discussion of ministry is completely off the table.
And that
I have
is
an
so
entirely separate
unusual.
life. Yeah.
That's so unusual for most mid-council leaders, and honestly, correct me if I'm wrong, but pastors
Yeah, absolutely it
most
is.
most of the time don't have um, that separation, which can be really
Craig
isolating.
Barnes and others have written about, searching for home and all the rest. And I think the 3-year stints that I had, we always were searching for home. And Diana and I both realized late in ministry, I think, that Oklahoma City's always been home. We might have denied it and tried to find home elsewhere, but this has always been the siren song for us to return back here.
That's awesome. So, what are speaking of home? What are some of the most exciting things coming out of Indian Nations Presbytery right now?
Oh gosh. Um, you know, I've been called a socialist Democrat for it, but in the wake of the closings of churches recently, and the pandemic through which we all suffered and struggled, and coming out of that, I think what I wanted to do was to give folks an opportunity to show what I wanted to do was show an opportunity that the presbytery could actually be nimble. And we're sort of like stirring a battleship. We can't turn quickly, but
Mhm.
I proposed to the coordinating council in the wake of the closing of churches that we simply send checks of $5,000 to each congregation, sort of an ecclesiastical version of a stimulus check. And
Mhm.
we put no strings on it. We would like to see it used for mission, but if they have a light bill that they can't possibly fit in their budget, God bless them. There are no strings at all. And
Mhm.
the excitement and the amazement of people at receiving those checks has been just wonderful. Fail fast, fail forward, fail often. When I proposed it to the coordinating council, the first speaker accused me of being a democratic socialist. But to my utter amazement and surprise, it passed unanimously. And that's a good lesson, give it a shot, give it a try. And I think the excitement among everybody has been so palpable that they don't have to fill out forms in triplicate and don't have to make their proposal. They're just getting the check and it's sitting in the middle of the table. And the idea is, what do you do? Craig Howard of Presbyterian Foundation, who was at Giddings Lovejoy in St. Louis, recommended a great book called Love, Let Go, about a church in Chicago, inner church in Chicago, that received a huge windfall, and it had massive bills, electricity and repaving the parking lot. And it decided, based upon the parable of the steward, it wrote a check of, I think, $500 to every member of the congregation and said, go do something with this. So I really modeled it on that. And interestingly, the only pushback I got was from a presbytery exec who mumbled, well, you're setting a real precedent for the rest of the presbyteries, aren't you? But otherwise, it's been so exciting to see this unfold.
But is that precedent a bad thing? I mean, I think that would have been my response, right? I mean,
that's the way I answered. The challenge is there. I mean,
yeah, and that's the way I look at everything that, not everything, but a lot of the things that we do at this with the Synod of the Sun is, what are other synods doing, and is this setting a precedent of some sort? If it's a good thing, I hope so. I hope that they're listening to their presbyteries. I hope that their presbyteries are listening to their congregations and offering opportunity to bless others, which is, kind of the point.
Exactly.
So, being a Facebook friend of yours, I note that one of your favorite hashtags is it dashboard pounding?
Dashboard pounding tunes.
Right,
Yes.
dashboard pounding tunes. And yet I listened to your Monday, what you do, a live piece.
Monday reflection. Yep.
Yeah, your
Thank
live
you for
Monday
listening.
reflection.
I think you're one of about 2 people who actually listen, but I have a ball doing them.
I listened to your Monday live reflection, and it was all about classical music that your dad listened to. So what are your favorite tunes, Charlie?
Well, the world's best dashboard pounding tune is Layla by Eric Clapton.
Really?
Hands down, absolutely. If you see me in traffic and it's playing, that poor dashboard's really getting a beating.
Wow. See, mine would have to be something like "Hit Me with Your Best Shot," guitar.
Good, absolutely.
I'm just saying, but I'm a child of the '80s, so.
In terms of classical music, I guess the genre for classical music would be either Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring or the 1812 Overture, which my father used to play early on Sunday morning in order to get us up out of bed. So it is embedded in my brain.
See, the 1812 overtures, and if you asked me anything about classical music, that would probably have to be my response, because it would be the only thing. But the 1812 overture would be big with me because our marching band, I was in the drill team. For us, it was the color guard.
You were a bandy.
I spun rifle in the bands, and was part of our halftime routine was the 1812 overture. So that was a big deal.
I like it.
Yeah,
that's fabulous. But befitting my love of baseball, the best tune ever is "Take Me Out to the Ball Game."
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like baseball, but
I can't wait. You and Thomas are going to take me to a Rangers game when I come down.
Well, maybe. now that they have a stadium with AC, yes.
With a roof. Exactly.
I could be all about that. Charlie, did we miss anything? I mean, I know there's so much more that we could talk about, but I am so grateful for this opportunity to have some authentic conversation. I'm grateful for your willingness to open up
This is great.
and be real and be personable with us. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
It
I'd
was fun.
do it again in a heartbeat.
Well, be prepared for a follow-up then.
Anytime.
Okay. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks.
In the Synod of the Son, we believe when we work together across boundaries, we make visible the good news and find wholeness as the body of Christ. In our common calling, we impact lives together. So let's remember to connect with, equip, and empower one another in the name of Jesus Christ, today and every day.